oh, this guy is the Indian national time trial champion and I'm in the break with him, that probably means I can be the Indian national time trial champion. Cycling is kind of falsely inspiring in that way, but at the same time, that's the beauty of it. You can believe whatever you want to tell yourself, really.
Hello, good evening. We're all new to this, so we might be live. Okay. Hello, good evening, everyone. Coming live from Peak Performance Bangalore. I'm here with one of the athletes that I love to see and speak to, Naveen John, who is a 4-time national time trial champion, 1-time road racing champion. He grew up in Kuwait, wanted to go to med school, finally ended in engineering at the Purdue University in US, found his calling of cycling there, and today he's an example to a lot of cyclists who race in India. Welcome to you, Naveen.
Thank you, Vijay. It's good to be here again.
So without much ado, since we have got time as a limitation, I want to jump straight into the questions.
Let's do it.
So, people don't know Naveen and how, or rather NJ, as he's fondly called, how you got into cycling. Was it something that you dreamt of while growing up as a kid in Kuwait?
No, not really. I didn't know the sport existed growing up, and really I got into the sport because of kind of the social aspect. It was where I found my friends, and where I made friends for kind of life in college, and then eventually found the competitive side of the sport. And in 2012, I made that jump, where I moved from the US to India, and I saw there was a little bit happening in the sport in India, but I really felt that it was stuck, and decided to book some one-way tickets, and here we are 9 years later.
So when did you realize that you could be an athlete who could compete in cycling?
Yeah, it's kind of weird, a sport like cycling is really kind of advanced, right? And in India, we are far from the best cyclists. In fact, we're kind of at the bottom, right? And so I'm stuck in this weird place as an athlete where there's like two playing fields that I compete on, kind of looking at the data before I came to India, I knew I could be one of the best in India. But then again, I had this view on the sport where I'd seen what the level is like, in the US and abroad, and I knew that I would be far from being competitive in that space, So I'm kind of stuck in this space where, weird space where, I know that I'm the best in the country, and I knew that I could be the best in the country, but I knew that there's a lot of work to kind of step up to even start to be able to compete.
So when you came from the US, was Bangalore a chosen place to reside and practice and train?
Yeah, Bangalore was mainly because my parents were here, and it's the only place in India I could really call home. And more importantly, I did look at other cities, but Bangalore had a cycling culture. Even back then, kind of the community of cycling as a sport kind of existed in Bangalore, and that I felt was super important. It was something that I could contribute to when I was not training, So that was super important in my choice.
So obviously, as a cyclist, you have multiple disciplines or categories to choose from, right? When did you decide that probably time trials is one category where you had the capability or competency to go all the way and be a champion?
Yeah, time trialing is something that I kind of fell in love with when I was in college. I think I just was naturally kind of attuned to that a little bit, and also coming late into the sport, it's a less tactical discipline, and it's a discipline with less variables. And so when I came to India, I said, I'm going to make this my focus, because winning a national time trial champion makes you, the first person on the list of a national team. And so it really took out a lot of variables and allowed me to be a part of, road cycling whenever we stepped out of India as a national team.
Right.
So yeah.
So if I look back at your last 5 years, the success that you have had with time trials is a little different from what it is in road racing. And I think you have won the national championship only once in 2017.
Yeah.
So what was the story behind it?
Yeah, I mean, so with road racing in India, it's, typically the time trial is the first event, then the road race is like the second or third day. And with the time trial is, you stamp you stamp definitively that you are, this strong compared to the competition. And so it kind of puts you on the radar of everyone in a road race, So it's really, road racing is a highly tactical kind of discipline. And as soon as people know that you're the strongest in the field, you're given less leeway. And so unless you're like on a different level, it's a really hard event to win. And I typically go into events looking either, at least at the national level, to either win or go home, And
so were you competitive right from early childhood? Is it a trait that you carry through the adulthood as you are in now?
To some extent, yes. I was never into sport in school, high school, but I was pretty competitive in academics.
Okay.
Me and a couple of friends, we were always kind of up there in classes, and we fought for this one mark here in our math papers. And interestingly, I met one of my friends who I was super competitive with when I went to Australia this time, and both of us chatted about how we were pretty competitive, back in the day, and maybe that's where some of this comes from. Yeah. But it's kind of interesting, because I go in with that mentality of being competitive and wanting to win when I'm at the national level, but I've got to kind of switch my mentality when I'm competing at the international level to some extent.
But it's interesting, right? Sport, a lot of people don't know about it, but requires a lot of data to support and compete well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure at some level, being good in academics and having the discipline, etc., also rubs off on the sporting side of anyone.
Absolutely. I mean, the way I look at cycling and my time in Indian cycling is a systems engineering problem,
Okay.
I mean, literally, I put down the variables, I look at it as a black box, there are some inputs, what are the outputs that I'm trying to kind of achieve. And that's how I plan a nationals campaign. That's how I plan my trips to Belgium. That's how I plan all my training, So that engineering mindset of defining a problem, outlining it, and coming up with a solution, and then executing and troubleshooting and, feedback loops and all of that. Yeah, I think if I wasn't an engineer, I probably wouldn't have figured it all out.
Yeah, so all engineers can possibly become cyclists one day.
Highly possibly, yes.
Okay. So let me talk a little about the competition that you face in India.
Yeah.
So if you have to point out few quarters or areas or people who are jostling for that title, who would that be? Just to give a sense to people who are listening.
Yeah. So the competitive scene in India is really top heavy. In a field of 100 guys, there's really about 4 or 5 guys who are competing for that top spot on the podium, and then you've got about 10 to 20 who are competing for the top 5, top 10. One of my competitors in this space has been Arvind Panwar. So he's a good friend of mine, and we've been, battling for the national time trial title for the past 7 years now. We've just been exchanging hands. And in road racing, there's a couple guys, some of the better sprinters in the country, but that's there's more musical chairs going on with that seat. There's new people coming in. And with the time trial, though, there's only really one person who's kind of given me a run for my money over the past 7 years.
So I've heard that typically when you come to cycling success, you need a core team around you to make you better.
Yeah.
Now you are one person without a team. NJ is a single person, right? And you go out competing against maybe the railways, maybe the services. How does it feel to be at the starting point, and you see on your left you have people from the services, on the right from railways, and you have coaches shouting instructions to them. How does it feel like, and how do you prep yourself mentally?
So, you know what, I prep for these things mentally every day in training. I know that these guys have people on the ground who are helping them, they have more hands, and when I show up to nationals, I probably have Che to bounce ideas off of, Che behind the camera today, but he's a guy I bounce off a lot of just maybe my insecurities or maybe my decision trees of what I should do on a particular day. And for me, my support system consists of the people who are with me, a year before I even line up for nationals. when I lost the national championships last year, 23rd of November, I came back to Bangalore. One of the first people I called was you.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, Vijay, I lost my national title, but I realized exactly what I did wrong, and I want to go and get it back next year. Are you in? And the thing you said was yes. And so there's a couple of people like that, to go support me with my kit and my apparel, my equipment. And so I've assembled this team of people who are with me, maybe not on race day,
correct,
but they're with me kind of at the beginning when I plan stuff, and that's where my strength lies compared to my competition.
So this is interesting because I think over the last 2 years, while I've been interacting with you, you also had this passion of getting Indian cycling to a certain level.
Yeah.
And I think one was the story of Belgium, and 1 year back you assembled a group of cyclists, took them to Belgium. Not that, you had the luxury of great money or anything, but you still assembled a team, spent around a couple of months there. What does that mean to you?
So this is what it means to me, right? People often complain about how, various sports in India, pick anything, right? That's not cricket, is kind of stuck. And one of the reasons for that, is pretty obvious, right? Because you've got athletes in our sport who, get to the best in India. And eventually, national champions are created every year, right? And but a lot of these athletes tend to walk away from the sport. And the reason for that is the sport ends up not having, while they end up having achieved these results, the sport ends up not growing along with them, along with their achievements. And what I realized was, 5 years, 10 years from now, my limited lifespan as an athlete in the sport, I want to be able to retire to my sport, a sport that's hopefully in a better place, so that, I can actually keep contributing to something, right? And so Belgium is a part of that, right? It's about the day I hang up my bike, which is in 1 or 2 years, I want there to be a cohort of 20, 30, 40, 50 riders that I can actually work with, to try and advance to the next step. And for me, it's part of that. It's about, unless I grow the sport, I'm not going to be able to stay in the sport, right? If there's no sport that's grown from when I first got into it. Yeah.
So I think we were chatting about it before we got live. So running has Kenya, cricket has maybe England, Australia, India to go to. It looks like cycling, Belgium is a choice.
Yeah.
Can you explain to the viewers a little bit more about what brings cyclists to Belgium?
Yeah, Belgium is, like you said, Belgium is to cycling as Kenya is to running, right? It's nowhere else in the world can you race for as cheaply as you can in Belgium. Nowhere is the number of races that you can do more than in Belgium. And it consistently produces the best cyclists in the world. And it's that chicken or the egg situation, right? People say we need to create this system in India that produces great athletes. But to me, the more obvious solution is leveraging systems that already exist outside India. And for cycling, Belgium has that. And the cost of entry is 50,000 rupees. It's a ticket to Belgium and back. So.
Yeah. So I can relate to running a little bit more, but you have. The amateurs, I would say, still wanting to go to Kenya, participate in races across the world. I'm sure a lot of aspiring cyclists who take cycling seriously would be watching this program. Do you think even they can aspire and be in Belgium whenever they want to?
The thing about racing in Belgium, it is elite level. It is the toughest scene there is. And cycling is a unique sport. It's a little different from running in the sense, running, a lot of success is defined by just personal improvement and personal bests, and moving from a sub 3 to a 245 to a 230. In cycling, it's a little bit of a different sport where really there's one winner on a day in a bike race, and everyone else is considered a loser. So cycling in that sense is a little bit more unforgiving as a sport, and to reach that level where you're actually competitive takes quite a bit of development and takes a couple of years, So for the amateur to go to Belgium, yes, it's great if you want to experience cycling culture and the beauty of the competitive sport, but it's definitely not for everyone.
Yeah. Right. So you picked up on a thing during the course of your last 1 minute, whatever you said, loss.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that the loss last year did hurt somewhere.
Yeah.
And you kind of got back meticulously planning every month.
Yeah.
And this year, gotten back to winning the time trial national championship, and just last month or earlier this month, also won the South Asian Federation gold.
Yeah.
So it's been an amazing journey that way. So as a lonely guy, how do you take the losses?
Yeah. The way I look at it is, I look at my career in sport is when I first moved to India. 2012 is when I look at when I started in it, and I look at having another 2 to 3 years in it. And to be honest, I've done 400 races during the course of that time, and I always tend to look at losses as a speck in the timeline. And when you put that into that perspective, so that's one way I deal with it, and the other way is as long as you have the reasons for why you lost, and you have a way to kind of give it another shot and rectify those mistakes.
Sure.
I think that's another way to deal with loss. As long as it's as long as you know what went wrong, and I knew what went wrong last year.
Yeah. So again, for the benefit of people who are aspiring to be better cyclists, I don't know whether you remember this, but a couple of years back, in one of our informal conversations, you had mentioned that not anybody, but a person who commits and does training with discipline can become a national champion. So do you still hold that?
I still
true?
subscribe. I mean, that's every athlete who comes to me and works with me that I coach. I tell them, if with 6 months of work and total commitment to your sport, you can be the best in the country. That's the beauty of being in a sport that isn't highly mature. It's the fact that the most committed guy in the room typically can be the best. And this is true for a whole bunch of sports in India.
Correct.
And I think really that's what's keeping us back in a lot of our sports. It's not the lack of this or the lack of that or the systems. I mean, those are reasons, but I think at the end of the day, it all starts with commitment from the athlete, just total commitment.
Right. So talking about commitment from athletes, another aspect to you would be your coaching aspect, right? So was that something which you took recently, or from when have you been coaching or mentoring people? And the second part of the question would be, being a competitive athlete, is there a compromise somewhere?
I first started coaching. I've always been coaching athletes in some capacity. I really kind of formalized things in 2017 when I said, I need to think about what after. And it started with about 4 athletes, and then one day, December 25th or 24th, it was Christmas Eve, I think, of 2018, I went from 4 to about 12. I just flipped a switch. I said, it's time to ramp things up. And now I work with about 10 to 15 athletes during the course of a year, and it's something I hope to grow once I hang up the bike. As far as conflicts of interest, I spend a lot of time picking and choosing the athletes I work with. Really, the most important thing for me to work with an athlete is athletes have to have clearly well-defined goals. They have to have the right support system around them, and they have to be objective about the way they train. Those are my 3 requirements, And I make sure I don't coach athletes who are competing with me. So I mean,
was it out of experience or?
No, I mean that was just common sense and something that I wanted to avoid. And so I work with athletes in the under 23 and under 18 category. So that way there's no conflict of interest. I'm not holding anyone back so that I hold on to my national titles. That's
interesting. One quick question on coaching before we get into other subjects. Do you see training per se in cycling still a little older, lagging behind when it comes to the Indian cycling context?
Yes, but it's changing so quickly. it's crazy, but when I first came to India and lined up at national championships in 2012, I was the only person on the line with a power meter. It's the equivalent of a heart rate monitor in running. And now pretty much 50 to 60% of the field have one. You know, this is not cheap equipment. This is anywhere between a lakh to a lakh and a half.
Sure.
And the crazy thing is, out of that 60% of the field, only about 20% know how to use it. You know, so all of them have bought into the idea that this equipment is essential.
Correct.
Not all of them know how to use it, right? And then there's the objectivity of using data. You can read a number of a speedometer or of a power meter, but what does it mean in the context of training, and what does it mean in terms of building a plan and peaking on a certain day? That knowledge is lagging, but it's changing very rapidly, you know. And so I work kind of, kind of how world-class coaches work, you know, training objectivity, using resources like training peaks. Communication is super important in a effective coaching relationship. Yeah, so the way I work with my athletes is the way the best coaches in the world work with their athletes. Yeah.
So let us talk about a few other aspects so that viewers can understand more about how to get better in cycling. One of the aspects would be the equipment per se. Now, any cyclist in India, wannabe cyclist or a triathlete, goes through this process of having to choose different bikes,
Correct.
all of different prices.
Correct.
And I think even you have been using multiple bikes in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So what goes into making that decision?
Yeah. To be honest, I think a lot of people dwell on what level of bike and what budget of bike to really spend on. At the end of the day, I suppose financial resources determine that. But to be honest, it doesn't take, for example, in cycling you have different layers of componentry. Bikes for the most part are all the same. These days they're all made of aluminium or carbon fiber, and one brand or the other doesn't really matter. Really, the brands I've worked with over the past years have really been connections with the people behind the brands, just like with any other association
Sure.
that I have. I'm fortunate to ride a good brand this year. So when people come to making those decisions, I think don't dwell on it too much. Just hop on the bike, and it's what I tell my athletes that potential athletes that I turn down is. I see athletes who think they are athletes or want to be athletes who just don't ride enough. And my sign off to them is just ride lots.
Wow.
It's keep it simple and just ride lots.
Right. I think another facet to you, talking about bikes, is also the fact that at some point in your last 3-4 years, I have myself seen you working on bikes. I think it really gives you a sense of what goes into biking and cycling.
So I don't let anyone touch my equipment. There's no mechanic in India who I unfortunately trust with my race day equipment. And so when I was in college, I couldn't work on a bike. But when I moved to India, the first thing I did was I kind of learned how to work on bikes because I knew that that's something I would have to do. And to be honest, as an athlete, when you travel a lot, Australia, Uzbekistan, Belgium, where were we? Nepal. Oftentimes you don't have access to a bike shop, and you've got to be able to fix your bike with, basic tools.
Right.
And so that's an essential skill set if you want to be an athlete. Not everyone is, a top level supported athlete, and for the majority of us, that's basic stuff that you've got to learn to do yourself.
So the other critical aspect is also nutrition.
Yeah.
So how important does a role does nutrition play?
Yeah. So for me, I don't know when the switch clicked, the importance of nutrition. I think for me it was quite early on, and I think it was part of the fact that I was a pretty heavy guy, almost 98 kilos, and I lost a whole bunch of weight through running, and then eventually found the sport of cycling. And I think that's my connection to nutrition was because of that. I was very tuned in to the fact that this is important. Hydration is one of the things that is my religion, almost to the point where it's habit. And one of the things I expound to all the athletes I coach, to the random person, I meet on a bike ride. It's make sure that you stay hydrated and you stay fueled. Those are the two things you'll see in my coaching notes to all my athletes, no matter what the workout is. It's just so important.
And let's also talk about a little bit of nutrition, because the Olympics is coming 2020, and you have issues of doping, clean nutrition. How do you manage that?
Yeah. So the way I manage it is I follow the rule of keep it simple. So we get drug tested at when you win a national championship, and I take pride in the fact that when I fill up the sheet, the only product that I take on there is Fast&Up Reload and the Fast&Up gels, and I know that Fast&Up stuff is informed choice, right? Sure. So it's tested, batch tested, and so you know what you're putting in your body. And when I see some of my competitors list down stuff, I'm like, there's 10 things listed. It's a laundry list, I'm like, you know what? I like that my list is short. Keep it simple is my kind of motto there.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about what the future holds for Indian cycling. Because I do hear people who have excelled outside of time trials and road racing. So cycling as a whole, where is it going?
Yeah, so you asked me this question when the biggest thing to happen in Indian cycling happened this year, when the men's junior team sprint team won the world championships. It's the first world championship medal that India has in cycling. Our federation is doing an awesome job with growing the sport of track cycling in highly specific disciplines, sprint cycling. They've figured out that there's a bunch of phenotypes and kids in the Andaman who are really good at this, and now there's a culture of this, and they're finding them, they're plucking them out, they're staying on them, they're building them up to be the best in the world in the junior ranks, right? And here's the thing, there's a ton of other disciplines in the sport of cycling. There's mountain biking, there's downhilling, there's road cycling, right? The reason why the federation has picked track cycling is because it is one of those disciplines in cycling that has the least number of variables. And they've kind of hit a gold mine in some sense, but in the meanwhile, a lot of the other disciplines are not getting that same attention. And so it's up to athletes in these domains to kind of really drive new pathways, and so my focus is highly specific on road cycling, and that's what I'm focused on. And we haven't even scraped the surface of what's possible in Indian cycling yet. And I think, once guys like me and Arvind retire, think about this. It's the first time that we're going to have second generation cyclists. As in parents, whose kids are going to be riding bikes. And it's crazy when you ask it's crazy that, and I feel it's so early to ask the question, what have we achieved in cycling? And we don't even have that yet. And I think once guys like me hang up the bike is where we're going to see the real magic.
I think it's a lot of hope for Indian sport, and especially cycling. Let's quickly go on to some fun questions.
Okay.
If you could be a superhero, who would it be and why?
Yikes. Is there a superhero that can be like invisible and just disappear and just like do nothing? That would be me. My superpower would be laziness.
Great.
I wish I could do that.
How many hours sleep do you do?
I sleep religiously. Minimum 8 hours in a day. I don't let anything disrupt my sleep. It's the most, especially as you get, I'm 33, and as I get older, the most important thing to keeping my body in one piece is sleep.
So that's an interesting input for all the viewers who are listening in today.
It is the top performance enhancing.
Did you have a favorite teacher?
Favorite teacher? Actually, my French teacher in high school. Annie ma'am, her name was, but
nice.
She was just awesome.
Great. So what's the most courageous thing you have done?
Courageous thing I've done? I can't think of anything that I've done that's super courageous, but so maybe a recent, it's kind of self-serving, but the day I was supposed to fly out for nationals, I was doing my final workout, and I was doing a sprint. I hit the ground at about 55 kph.
Okay.
Right? I'm sitting on Hyderabad highway. My hand is bleeding. My road bike is broken with 2 days from nationals. And the fact that I was able to pick up the pieces and go and win my 4th national time trial title 36 hours later, I think was pretty courageous.
That's awesome.
Most people didn't know that happened, but yeah, it did.
So what's the best piece of advice you have ever received?
There's so many things, but one of the things that I kind of hold true or kind of hold close to my heart is nobody owes you anything. You know, it's this idea that if you think you owed anything in life, you better change that, you know, flip that switch to realizing that nobody owes you anything. And yeah, resentment kind of disappears at that point. And it's all about you driving towards your goals. Yeah.
Quickly, we have run short of time, but there's a round where we do rapid fire.
Okay.
So let me see how it goes.
Okay.
Merida's Cultura 8000E.
Yeah, that's my current bike. Kick ass.
UCI Road World Championships 2016.
Surreal, and we need to go back.
Time trials.
Suffering.
Rainbow jersey.
Fantasy.
Indian cycling project.
Where I'm going to grow old and grey.
Fast and Up.
Hydrate or die.
Great. So before we conclude, we have already run short of time, but can you look directly into the camera and give one last message to all the viewers before we sign off?
Pretty simple. If you're in Indian cycling and you're an under 18, and if you're wondering how you get better at the sport and how Indian cycling moves forward, 2 words: Kaam karo.
Kaam karo.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sanjay.
Awesome. It's
nice having you here. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right. See you guys.
It really is up to individual athletes and independent support systems to do more, you know, step up. And I think that's really what's holding the progression of the sport behind. There needs to be initiative at the community level and at state level to really kind of feed into the work that our national federations are doing.